Engineers of Reddit. What's the most ridiculous idiot proofing you've had to add in your never-ending quest to combat stupid people? Story 1, we had a pedestrian bridge next to a bridge for vehicles separated by about a 3-foot gap. The bridges were about 20 feet high over the water. So many drunk pedestrians climbed over the rails and tried to jump between bridges and didn't make it that I was directed to design a safety net to hang between the two bridges. Story 2, wife is a civil engineer. The one that came to mind for her was that she had to add to the specification of a construction contract that stated that workers would not drink the water that accumulated at the bottom of an excavation. Story 3, I work on cars. So almost everything is designed around protecting people. My favorite is that we have to make the HVAC system louder and engine noise insulation worse, because people will complain if they can't hear the systems running. We can make almost silent air ducts, but our warranty spend would go up. Story 4, I'm a mech intern. I walked in on my manager discussing a design with another engineer. All I heard was, so the guys will probably use that as a hammer. So I made it out of this stronger material. When they're working, they will probably be throwing this small door open. So I used stronger hinges and added to stop. It's things like this that I really appreciate about my internship. I likely wouldn't have thought about that myself. Story 5, civil engineer here. While laying asphalt, usually we close the road and cover using barricade tapes. But no matter how hard we try, people always find ways to go through and ruin the whole process. Ultimately, we had to use security to block the roads. Story 6, former combat engineer here. We built a 3-foot-high fence across a minefield, including huge red warning triangles every 4 feet. Someone still stepped over it to go take in the woods. They were carried out on a stretcher. Nothing is idiot-proof. Story 7, I work in a call center, and all of the PCs were slung on straps under the desk's ID. Love to know which genius came up with that idea. So, people would be on the phone swinging back and forth in their chair and hit the power button. Then ID get a ticket saying my modem keeps turning off. I disabled the power button from immediately shutting down the PC if you pressed it, but of course they'd get into a position sometimes where it'd be held down long enough to override it. Solution, duct tape and a bottle cap. Once we upgraded all the PCs to new ones, I took the time to remove those stupid straps and put the PCs behind a monitor out of reach instead. Story 8, I have one customer that takes a product, removes the battery packs, and solders them in backwards. He cuts the wires to the batteries, then solders red to black and black to red, then calls us complaining that they don't work. There's no idiot proofing that I could think of at this point. I pretty much just admit defeat now. Edit, wow, this got big overnight. Answer a few questions here. We can't pot them. They have replaceable AA batteries in them. They're off warranty. Every time they come back in, we bill them. They don't seem to mind. And I'm so used to this guy's shenanigans, they don't take long to fix. That first one, though, it took me forever to figure out that the power lines were reversed. It just never occurred to me. It's just not something you'd suspect. I sent him an email after half a dozen or so of these came in backwards. Explained how red goes to red, black to black, with pictures. Only had one coming backwards after that. I've always wondered what would happen if this guy ever needed to jump his car. I've designed Rev 2 of the product with this guy specifically in mind. They use a USB-C charge port and Li-ion battery. No need to open it up and swap AA batteries now. We'll see how he responds to that. The big question, why? I have absolutely no idea what this dude is trying to accomplish. Your guess is as good as mine. Story 9, application engineer here. When handling a 3D laser scanner, it has to be placed and fixed on a stable tripod. A flat rail of the balcony is not a suitable substitute for it. And no, the insurance has not covered the total loss of the device after it fell from the 5th floor to the concrete pavement. Story 10, industrial designer here. You have no idea how many pointers I have to add to the products I make. I had to add arrows to a product that had 2 pieces that the client could put together and remove for cleanup. It was designed that it could only fit into one position, and it was made very obvious which position that was in a larger shape and hole. No, I still had to put 2 arrows in case people couldn't tell the bigger bump could only fit in the bigger gap. Story 11, I work for the utility company, mainly in the distribution of natural gas. All of the pipelines we put into the ground are either yellow or black and yellow, and only gas is allowed to use yellow for their pipes. Some of them have natural gas printed on them in big bold letters. We put special tape about 20 centimeters above the pipeline to indicate that there's a gas pipeline below, and whomever is digging there should be careful. All these precautions and warnings, and we still get daily incidents from idiots who are digging somewhere and hit a gas pipeline. Story 12, ever write any software. The amount of error checking you have to do on any user input is phenomenal. No matter how much explanation you provide, users seem to be chimpanzees entering stuff seemingly at random. Story 13 reminds me of one of my first design jobs. Okay, boss, I got the design. The front footing needs to be 20 inches wide, The rear footing is 17 inches wide, so both of them are 20 inches. Why do we need a 20-inch if a 17-inch will work? Because that way we don't have to worry about the construction guys building a 17-inch front footing and a 20-inch rear footing. Story 14, I work remodeling small businesses. Our niche is we keep the business running while doing the remodel. I've caught people climbing over fences, ducking under moving heavy machinery, broken locked doors, all to act surprised when we tell them this area is off limits and point to one of the 10 signs we posted. Story 15, mechanical engineer. I work on systems that need to be light and durable, but the business guys want it cheap. This is a choose two sort of situation, so you can probably guess what got dropped. I can't tell you how many times I've told the operators to not intentionally drop the product from 6 feet onto concrete. Can't get specific, since it's a very niche classified market. Story 16, an app which scans barcodes to recognize items. It runs on Android and uses the device's camera to handle the scanning bit. The number of times the question is asked, is this supported on secure cameraless devices? Or our devices don't have cameras, and they don't have a barcode scanner. Can the app still work? Story 17, years ago, I worked as a building engineer, glorified maintenance man for an office building that had endless complaints about the AC heater not working. The staff in the office would adjust the thermostat up and down all day, and then everyone else would complain it was too hot or too cold. It did not matter what kind of lock or cage I put on it. They would break and remove within a day or two of a new one being installed. So I got a new thermostat with a remote sensor and installed it in my office with the remote sensor near where the old T-stat was. And I left the old T-stat in place with low voltage power so that it would appear to function. Then I let them change the temp on the old T-stat all they wanted while I programmed the real one in my office to our building standards. Just like that, the complaints were reduced by 90. Engineering coworker always told the story of when he used a work support at one of the leading electronic lab equipment, e.g. oscilloscopes companies. Engineers would call or email when a piece of hardware stopped working, and the initial support advice was to ask the engineer to check the polarity on the power cable, just in case it was, plugged in incorrectly. Story 18, in the process of turning my woodcrafting hobby into a career. With every project I add to my portfolio, I've seen a lot of requests for desks that are so customized, they want everything that can't happen. They want an armrest where there's also a cup holder. They want a keyboard at this height while having the monitor at that height. All these impossible requests, I eventually sat down and thought to myself, if I was super lazy and didn't want to move from one spot, what would make for the perfect office desk? So I made one, got $150 from it. Story 19, structural engineer. When designing a hand wheel for a door on a ship, we had to intentionally design the hand wheel to break before the shaft, because we can't trust idiots to not spin it as hard as they possibly can, destroying the entire door in the process. Story 20, this was while I was in school for electrical engineering. The prof looked at us one day and said, you can't make something 100 idiot-proof, because the universe will just make a better idiot at the challenge that has stuck with me since. Story 21, structural engineering at an industrial facility. Switch to pipe or HSS for bracing, because anything made out of angle would be immediately torched out of the way if it ever got remotely close to anything maintenance wanted to work on, since it was just an angle iron. Story 22, not my site, but a coworkers who gave us updates at our weekly oversight coordination meeting back in the summer of 2016. His construction site had a 60-foot pit on site, which was being excavated safely per all industry regs. However, it did not have 24H lighting, and there was minimal fencing around the edge. This was fine because they were only excavating during the day, and access to upper edge was blocked off and controlled, and the whole site was properly controlled and fenced off. All obligatory safety measures necessary were in play, and the laydown area was controlled. You know what else happened in the summer of 2016? Pokemon Go came out. There were 3 Pokestops on the site. He had to hire round-the-clock security so people wouldn't sneak onto the site in the middle of the night and die. Then it turns out people got clever, and you had groups where like 4 people would run diversion for security while they gave all their phones to another person who would sneak onto the site in the middle of the night and run everyone's phone. So they had to hire more security to prevent this diversion tactic from working. Luckily, as everyone remembers, most people lost interest after a month, and they stopped coming. When you're doing a risk plan, you think about schedule and budget. You don't think, what's my risk mitigation strategy for a breakout mobile game enticing idiots to accidentally dump their corpse on my worksite, and how much money should I set aside to manage it? Story 23, a sound engineer asked me to assist him with a funeral home's need for variable music levels to subdue loud talking in the parlor. It may seem counterintuitive, but with sensors installed, as talking grew louder in the viewing room, the computer-adjusted music became softer. Likewise, when the room for the wake was hushed, the music became somewhat louder, The director said that most people lack common sense, good manners, and didn't know how to behave by moderating their talking levels before an open coffin. The net effect of the music's variable volume helped to maintain an overall peaceful atmosphere conducive for those coming to the parlor to pay their last respects, according to the director's request. Story 24, not too exciting, but most of the real stupid proofing ends up in labeling, namely the iFudfy user manual. The real ridiculousness happens in the failure mode effect analysis FMEA meetings. This is where you have to imagine every thinkable possible misuse, no matter how outlandish, and assign an occurrence score and severity score, then mitigate, often the IFU. These meetings bring out an infuriatingly creative side from your QA people, who are otherwise the most uncreative people in the office. Story 25, I worked on an old mainframe system that was so sufficiently idiot-proof that the workers started just saying, if ITLL let you do it, it must be okay, instead of understanding their processes. When we replaced that system, we found all sorts of things they'd been doing against policy because no one knew it was against policy, and so no one told us to write a new catch to stop them from doing it. Then after we replaced the system, we basically had to replace everyone because they kept just doing whatever the new system would allow. Except the new system had none of those checks, so we had a few months where literally nothing was in line with policy. We had to try to explain to them that it was literally their jobs to know what the policy was and enforce it. Story 26, way back when I designed a product that had an optional battery module that was meant to connect to a main module. To assemble the battery module to the main module, you had to put the round peg in the round hole and the square peg in the square hole. That's it. I even put a sticker with instructions on the back on the battery module. Even so, we still had around one of clients that couldn't figure it out this puzzle. One particular client had used a hammer to force the module together the wrong way. Another had tried to solder wires through the holes and pegs. Another didn't understand that he had to connect the battery module to the main module for the former to power the latter. You can't engineer around stupid. There's no worst case. It goes all the way down past 0 to minus infinity. Story 27, arrow on here. Someone on our team, everyone hyped up, was the most unqualified person I've ever met. 8 years experience, and they openly admitted they cheated not just on their exams, but also their mask thesis. Anyways, this person didn't even know the basic equations for aerodynamics and aircraft performance. Couldn't code despite seeing the same code for years, and still couldn't use in-house tools that myself and 2 other new people learned in about 3 months on the job. This person also openly stole my presentations and worked to show in group meetings, even forgot to swap my name at the end slide once. We got so tired of doing their work and spoon-feeding them stuff and the managers turning a blind eye to them and telling them stuff. They should have known that we actually ended up coding in error message prompts to clue them in when they got to the same questions we answered millions of times. When that didn't click in, I actually coded in messages showing them which lines to go to find common issues. Guess what? 5 years of MATLAB and 14, they still couldn't use a debugger. I actually got personally so annoyed that I had certain error catches go to their printer and email to clue them I could go on for ages, but this was hands down the worst engineer you'll probably ever meet. The only thing this person was good at was sucking up to the right people and getting away with the most blatant disqualifications you'll ever see. They're doing their PhD now. Story 28, software engineers sort of made parts of a website to let the customer decide where they would like holes in our product, did not realize customers would fill in a hole with a diameter of 0 every 0 millimeters. So no hole was made, and the air supply it was supposed to give did not work very well. Now they can no longer pick 0. It has to be more. And added an extra button in case someone actually did not need holes. Story 29, software engineer. The number of times I've had to explain that backwards compatibility can't exist for a new feature is astounding. Usually this has come in the form of new hardware is getting released and new software is written to support said hardware. Customers complain that old software written before new hardware existed doesn't behave well with the new hardware and make us think about needing to upgrade the software or having to update clients as well as servers or some other ridiculous thing. Story 30, mechanical engineer, working in HVAC heating, ventilation, and air conditioning here. I have a contractor firm that always looses the mechanical plans when we send them out. To mitigate this, I send the plans over to the primary and his boss, as well as upload them to an online cloud where they keep their plans for the projects. I have started to CC their secretary, as well as label the folders plans in here. I still get weekly panic calls from them, saying they can't find the plans for different projects, and I just facepalm every time. Story 31, software engineer here. In the organization, which I previously used to work, their business model was based on supply chain. It was very hard to explain technical limitations to non-technical product managers, mostly of operations side. I sometimes used to explain them by relating to everyday things like explaining server or any resource as a pod or something which has a limited capacity and you cannot fill more water, serve more requests than that. It was kind of fun. I remember once I explained them horizontal and vertical scaling by taking example of train and bus. You can attach more coaches to train to handle more requests. That's horizontal scaling, whereas you need to hire a large bus to accommodate more people that vertical. Story 32, the stupid proofing I've had to do for engineers in my company, is probably only combated by the same they've had to do for me. I bet now when I train people I say when you make guides, assume you're talking to a person who doesn't know even the most basic things. Don't write execute command blah blah. Take a screenshot, circle the bar, and right type in XYZ, and click enter, and so on. Same thing goes for physical things. Surely they'd shut the valve off before. No, they wouldn't do all if it's not written explicitly in the manual. And maybe even then, on one hand, it's a bit annoying to make things stupid proof, but the way I think of it is we all have brain freeze moments. The longer time it takes us to engineer a part or write a guide to make a process simpler is worth it if one distracted employee doesn't get hurt or make a mistake that could have been avoided. Story 33, many years ago, I somehow became the owner of the software that was used to print out labels that would be applied to our two-way radios, pagers, etc. There were 4 to 8 labels that would give FCC details on frequencies, details on the batteries, etc. But if the radio was going to Japan, a few of them were not to be applied. Operators were trained for this, but would too often make mistakes because there was a label with numbers and writing on it. Applying it was a quality defect, which was closely monitored. To fix it, an engineer asked me to not print the information for the Japan radios. That would produce a blank label, which should alert people not to apply it to the radio. A few months later, a quality defect appeared where someone had applied a blank label. The engineer called me back and asked if we can put do not apply on the labels instead of leaving it blank. I thought for a bit and said that some operator is going to apply the label that says do not apply anyway. Plus we would have to print it in about 7 languages. He agreed and went off to figure out a different way to deal with it. Story 34, electrical engineer in the building industry. Started putting wiring diagrams on the blueprints for how to wire emergency lighting battery packs. Because sometimes when I did an inspection, I would find lights that either never turn off or would go into emergency mode and drain the battery every time you turn off the lights. Because someone was too stupid to not read the simple instructions that came with the battery pack. Story 35, at one of my internships, I was called Bollard Man because I personally installed over 50 bollard around the plant within 3 months in response to people nearly destroying expensive things. I think some operators think it's a personal challenge to see what they can get to fit between bollards and park and hazard zones. For the outdoor areas, I started reading into defensive architecture designs to come up with protective designs that don't actually look like bollards. Methods like planting trees and bushes, adding drainage ditches, decorative boulders, picnic benches, street lamps, walls, and so on. The kicker being, I'm an electrical engineer. It's not even remotely in my job description, lol. I've just learned that there's just no amount of signage and warnings to convince people that even though you can't see the megawatts of power flowing through the equipment, they're in fact quite deadly if damaged or misused. Story 36, I split my head open on a fuse box at work and had to get my head stapled shut. The next day, the maintenance guy tied a pool noodle to the bottom of the box. I felt like a moron because I had to sit right next to it every day. Story 37, I used to work as a mechanical designer at an automation company. We built pallet dispensers for warehouses. They're a big metal box where a forklift will load 40 to 80 pallets into them as a double stack, and the machine spits them out 2 at a time at the bottom for all the picking trucks. The dispenser was lag bolted to the floor. Anyway, we get a warranty complaint. The mounting bolts are broken, and it keeps moving. Turns out the warehouse guys weren't slowing down to get pallets from the machine, but ramming it and using it as a brake. It was at the end of a corridor, so they had a nice long run up. We had to turn the machine 90 degrees, so they couldn't build up speed and double the number of lag bolts and up the size. Story 38, architect here. Designing a food cold storage facility which needed auto opening closing doors between -22 degrees Celsius storage chamber and loading bay. Doors are for forklift access. Forklifts are very good at destroying doors. Worked with fork truck manufacturer considering max speed in a straight line. Design system of barriers at 90 degrees to doors to channel the trucks to the doors in a control corridor. Had photocell at start of barrier. Induction loop in floor and radar above door. Length of barriers from door was such that truck could not travel length of barrier, even at full speed, and arrive at door without the door having opened due to any or all of the 3 triggering sensor mechanisms. And we added in a big safety factor. and the trucks had to turn 90 degrees to get between barriers, so they weren't even at full speed when they triggered the first sensor. Took 2 days to get a door destroyed. Story 39, one of our manufacturing engineers, was tired of production workers using expensive air tools as hammers. So he drilled a hole in the base of a handled hammer and glued in an air connector. Having them hook it up to air and be amazed at how good it performed was amazing. Story 40, a decade ago. I was a structural engineering intern. I designed a column pedestal for a prefab steel building, and I think the most economical design was a 16 by 18 pedestal. My boss says to me, make it 18 by 18 so they can't orient it wrong by accident. And I think that's the thing from that internship that I still think about the most. Story 41, in uni, I had to take a safety course, and the professor told us every warning is there. Because someone died because of it, please don't be responsible for the next one. Thanks. Story 42, not an engineer, but actually an engineering student. Me and my buddies who were also engineers decided to make a ballista thing. Went over 400 FPS. It was more than enough to bust a door down, of course. Enter one of our non-engineering students. I'll call him Mike, who decided to try and wield this thing. Keep in mind, this thing was large and heavy, and it took 4 of us to even wield it properly because otherwise it was not going to be aimed right. Anyways, Mike tries to aim it and fire it off, much to our displeasure and annoyance as we told him not to. But since it didn't have a trigger or a traditional catch, and was instead shot akin to a crossbow-esque ballista, he misfired it, which the projectile ricocheted and shot him in the... From there, we built in a safety feature which allowed the band to catch, but it doesn't fire without a long trigger pull. Bonus due to our new feature, we had inadvertently increased the velocity to 470 FPS. So Hoot, TLDR engineering students built a toy ballista, non-engineering friend with it like an idiot, and we had to make an actual safety catch for it, which increased the velocity and force. Many moons ago, I managed a support function in cybersecurity that included a sysadmin group. They had gotten lazy and were repurposing laptops throughout the organization without properly updating them and removing the previous user's files first. So, I had them go through a 2-step process of wiping the laptop and putting on a fresh build from corporate to make sure they were up to date and didn't include any prior user's data. We built custom boot disks that were to be used for the wiping. They were printed on orange blank DVDRs, which we paid extra for. They were only available to sysadmin staff. The staff were explicitly told, and writing was on the disk, to never boot a machine with the disk unless the intent was to wipe the machine and start from scratch. And the scripted process had several very loud and garish screens warning this will delete the entire hard drive irreversibly. Do you want TO continue? Despite all of this, we were forced by audit to have the machines log on to the corporate network first, and then query the sysadmin for their SSO password before wiping the machine. Why? Because despite all that, 3 machines have been inadvertently wiped. Those people are the reason you get warnings on Windex bottles. Story 43, am not an engineer, but a heavy equipment mechanic. We have one very big garage door on the side of our building. There are 2 large signs on either side of the door in English and Chinese big customer base that say do not enter, a line painted on the ground that says stop, do not enter in it. A 4-foot x 10-foot orange sign that says customer entrance with arrows pointing to the front of the building with arrows painted on the ground, also going to the front of the building, and a chain that hangs across the doorway with another sign that says staff only. I wish I was kidding when I tell you that even with all that, at least 2 people a day walk into the shop and are genuinely surprised when they're confronted. My favorite one was the dude who literally hit his head on the sign hanging from the chain as he ducked under it, then argued with me for 5 minutes about how he's there to pick up his machine. Like, dude, do you see a desk with a cash register? When you go to McDonald's, do you go in the back where they keep the dumpster and demand service? What the is wrong with you people? Story 44, late to the party, but here it goes. A grad-level lab supervisor poorly cleaned a chem station and proceeded to eat his lunch at that station. The previous students working on that station were working with a cyanide compound. The lab supervisor suffered but didn't die. During a company freeze, a systems architect fingered a script and pushed a global software update that forced a reboot to all domain servers internationally during a live demo of a product to board of investors. This is one of my top favorites. Director-level constantly complaint about slow laptop. Security team advised him to stop going to suspicious sites, in which he angrily yelled at them that all he does is work while he is home. Then the IT team would have to re-image his laptop. This happened about 5 times. Then the director of security got involved, and in front of everyone showed how he was watching from multiple shady sites. And exactly when he clicked on Start Webcam Show, he got infected. He thought cleaning his history was enough to hide his footsteps. By the way, if you work for a top 50 Fortune 500 companies, you sign off all your data privacy rights when using IT equipment. There are many advanced tracking software that tracks every single character you type, every website you go to. Clearing cookies history will not help you. There are rules to protect your privacy to a certain degree, but if the company ever needs to create a case against you or to collect proof, they can fully audit you so easily. I'm no longer in this field, but I will tell you, there's so many sick PPL out there. Story 45 instrument guy here. We had a chemical contact chamber with a very complex cascade control system. There were about a dozen controllers interacting and indicating the head operator would constantly adjust knobs and screw up the process. Eventually, we decided to shut the whole system off and just use one analyzer, one valve, and one controller because it worked better. Before we put the thing back in service, we wired the controller outputs so the meters jump around when the operator turns the knobs. None of it did anything. He would go every day and move knobs and watch meters until he eventually retired. We set the only working controller at the correct set point and put out a service label on it. Story 46, just in general, the insane size and quantity of warning labels that have to be all over everything like a riding lawn mower. If you don't know that blades are sharp, mufflers are hot, and you shouldn't stick your hand into moving belts, you have to be a real idiot. To be fair, it's mainly so that if you hurt yourself, the corporate lawyers can say we told you not to do that, but it ruins the aesthetics of a lot of equipment. Moreover, it causes people to ignore things that should actually be warnings, because now the paradigm is that every warning is just painfully obvious BS. Story 47 worked on the Railroad EU, and the safety rules are crazy sometimes. Imagine every time someone get hurt, they make a new rule, or try to prevent it in other ways. No room for common sense or logic. So electric trains run on those power lines above the track. Scary angry pixies live in the power lines. And, of course, some people want to meet them, or do by mistake when climbing a train. So one year they decide, we need yellow danger signs everywhere. And I mean everywhere, not just trains and wagons, but every power line post 60 meters apart. Feet x3 every bridge, and they all need cleaning. As to the engineering, every kind of post needs its own design. Depending on the dimensions of the post, materials like iron, galvanized, concrete, plastic spacers, and grounding to avoid buildup from the magnetic field, a sticker is not good enough for the world of bored railroad engineers. Most could be installed with the same new tension perfect installment tool they invented. So that's something, maybe one day this saves a life, and all the time installing and cleaning these signs will be worth it, but I bet the guy's going to earn his Darwin Award some other way. Story 48, a common mistake that people make when trying to design something completely foolproof is to underestimate the ingenuity of complete fools Douglas Adams. Story 49 boss shared a story about how they had to make their no-step stickers on agriculture equipment places you should not step textured and more grippy because people sued after slipping on them. Story 50, not me personally, but in a different module in a factory I used to work in, a guy stuck his hands into a heated acid vat to grab material he had dropped. His PPE saved him from chemical burns, but he did end up with second-degree burns. I saw their modules process engineer walking around our area and looking at the acid vats. He said he was considering putting up "Don't stick your hands" and the acid signs up, and we joked about no swimming signs instead. Story 51 in the vein of social engineering, I was part of emergency management in and around a zombie trend at the time. As part of in-house revisions, I started including zombie tie-ins to general purpose and awareness. It made buy and jump significantly that helped stupid-proof real situations by simple participation and meme reinforcement. Story 52 long before the eponymous Murphy installed a set of sensors backwards, so they didn't work. Buckminster Fuller wrote an essay in prose form about control by adequate design of misuse. The short name for the process is don't proofing. Working in a customer-facing position, just engineering a space so people are able to figure out how to navigate it is impossible. You can design for 98, but there's always a persistent 2 that will actively thwart everything you put in place to prevent their blunderings. Even if you literally stand at the door and tell each person personally what to do, not do, or expect, 2 will immediately ask or do the opposite of what you just said and get all agitated at you at the results. Case in point, when COVID hit, the office in my auto shop closed and all business was done outside. I put up 3-day glow neon-colored signs saying not to enter the office. Months into shutdown, huge numbers of people were still going in, so I started an experiment to see if there was a number of signs that was enough to get the 98 up to 99.5. Every time someone went in, I added another do not enter sign. It got up to 9 signs before I gave up and took down all, but the original 3, before losing the last shreds of hope for humanity. There were signs taped over the door handle you'd have to grasp and wrinkle Didn't matter. A chair placed in front of the door, again with two bright, do not enter signs you'd have to grasp to move the chair. Two pictograms, and even a blow-up of a Gandalf you shall not pass meme. The same persistent two could not be swayed or changed. When I went to Mother's Day brunch with my mom right after our county first reopened for outdoor dining, she did the same thing, and I wanted to explode. The hostess told us we're going to walk through the restaurant to the outdoor patio now. My brother and I walked through, but my mom stopped in the doorway and spun around, causing the hostess girl to have to jump back and catch the door again, and says in an annoying sing-song voice at a casual conversational pace, "Oh, so I guess we're eating inside." Story 53, am not an engineer, but I can relate to this. Was working on a website redesign in 2020, and one of our head salespeople providing input for a specific market told us to include something above the fold to tell people to scroll down. Our whole dev team ignores this request, because who needs to be told to scroll down? We now have a header that says scroll down for more resources, because people seriously could not figure it out. Story 54, back in the day, I was an IT engineer in the Army. I was given the task to write procedures that anyone could follow. I spent a couple days on the procedure to ghost reset laptops that had been in the field. The Sarge got this guy to test it without any help. First step was connect the laptop to the switch with an Ethernet cable and confirm the light goes green. Dipstick used two separate unconnected cables and tried for 30 minutes to work out why the light wasn't green. He had 6 months of IT training at this point. Sarge turned to me and said, "You failed," and walked out laughing his head off.